I had imagined the dinner celebrating my promotion would be a moment of pride, maybe a chance to finally prove to my wife Sarah that hard work and humility were worth more than flashy displays of wealth. Instead, I sat at the head of the table, at Le Maison Rouge, surrounded by fake smiles and judgment, watching as James Bennett, my wife's work friend and owner of the city's most prestigious car dealership, turned my achievement into a mockery of everything I stood for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening had started normally enough. My family-owned auto repair shop had just landed a contract with the city's fleet department, a deal that had taken months of careful negotiation and proof of our quality work. Sarah had suggested we celebrate at the most expensive restaurant in town, insisting it was time we stepped up our game. I should have known something was wrong when she spent extra time getting ready. When she insisted I park my trusted Honda Civic around the corner rather than use the valet service. What kind of man? James's voice cut through the ambient chatter. Of the restaurant, his Italian suit probably worth more than my monthly income, celebrates a business victory driving a 10-year-old Civic? His perfectly whitened teeth flashed as he gestured to the Ferrari he'd so prominently displayed with the valet. No wonder the city's only giving you their scraps. Image is everything in this business. The other guests, mostly Sarah's friends, from her real estate firm, tittered politely. My wife didn't defend me. Instead, she stared at her wine glass, a slight smile playing at her lips as James continued his assault on everything I'd built from the ground up. Little did any of them know I'd spent the last 6 months gathering information that would wipe that smug smile off James's face. His dealership might have looked pristine from the outside, but I knew what was really going on behind those gleaming showroom windows. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Michael Chen, the state's lead investigator for automotive fraud. "Everything's ready? Just say the word." I took a slow sip of water, letting James's laughter wash over me. He thought he had it all, the dealership, the status, and soon my wife. But I had something much more valuable, the truth about Bennett Luxury Motors and the hundreds of customers he'd defrauded with odometer rollbacks and falsified vehicle histories. James raised his glass, that arrogant smirk still plastered across his face. "To Alex," he announced, my name dripping with condescension, "and his modest achievements. May he someday learn that in our world, you are what you drive." I smiled back, knowing that very soon he wouldn't be driving anything except, maybe, a prison transport van. "You know what, James?" I said, pulling out my phone. I couldn't agree more about image being everything. In fact, I think it's time for a change. The text I sent to Michael was just 3 words. Let's do it. James Bennett had no idea that his entire empire was about to crumble, or that I would be the one to buy it all for pennies on the dollar once the dust settled. He saw me as nothing but a small-time mechanic with a cheap car and simple dreams. He was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you've underestimated. The maitre d' approached our table, his expression grave. "Mr. Bennett, there are some gentlemen here to see you. They say it's urgent." James's face flickered with the first hint of concern I'd seen all evening. As he stood up, straightening his designer jacket, I caught Sarah's questioning look. She didn't know what was coming either. "Is everything all right?" she asked James, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture that was far too familiar. He gave her what he probably thought was a reassuring smile, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Of course, darling. Probably just some paperwork that needs immediate attention. You know how it is in the luxury car business. Everything's urgent when you're dealing in millions." I watched him walk away, knowing that the next time I saw him, that expensive suit would be wrinkled and that confident strut would be replaced by the shuffle of a man watching his life unravel. The investigation I'd helped initiate would expose everything. The tampered vehicles, the forged documents, the insurance fraud. James Bennett was about to learn that true success isn't about the car you drive. It's about the integrity you maintain. Sarah's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Alex, you're being awfully quiet. James was just trying to give you some friendly business advice. There's no need to be sensitive about it." I met her gaze, seeing not the woman I'd married 6 years ago, but a stranger who had somehow lost her way in the pursuit of status and wealth. "You know what, Sarah? You're right. James has taught me a lot about business tonight. In fact, I think the lessons are just about to begin." A commotion near the front of the restaurant drew everyone's attention. Raised voices, the flash of badges, and the unmistakable sound of James Bennett protesting as he was led away by state investigators. Sarah's wineglass slipped from her, her fingers staining the white tablecloth a deep crimson. "What's happening?" she whispered, her face pale. "Alex, what did you do?" I stood up, placing my napkin carefully on the table. "I didn't do anything, Sarah. James did this to himself. I just made sure the right people knew about it." I pulled out my wallet, laying down enough cash to cover the bill. "Oh, and about that image problem James mentioned, I think I'm about to solve it. After all, nothing says success quite like owning the largest luxury car dealership in the city." The look of shock on her face was worth every moment I'd spent being belittled, every snide comment about my car, every betrayal I'd endured. As I walked out of La Maison Rouge, I could hear the whispers starting, the rumors beginning to spread. But I didn't care, because while James Bennett had been busy mocking my Civic, I'd been busy building a case that would give me everything he had. Sometimes the best revenge isn't driving the fastest car, it's watching your enemies walk home. Morning after the restaurant incident, I sat in my office at the auto repair shop, watching the local news coverage explode across every channel. Luxury car dealer James Bennett, arrested in massive fraud investigation, scrolled across the bottom of my screen as reporters swarmed outside Bennett Luxury Motors' main showroom. The gleaming Ferraris and Lamborghinis that had been James's pride and joy now sat untouched behind crime scene tape, their perfect finishes reflecting the flash of police lights. I took a slow sip of coffee from my weathered shop mug, the one I'd been using since I first opened this place 10 years ago. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since last night. Missed calls from Sarah, messages from her friends, even a few desperate texts from James himself. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened my laptop and clicked on a folder I'd been building for months, labeled simply Bennett Documentation. Inside were hundreds of files, customer complaints that had been buried, evidence of odometer tampering, forged vehicle history reports, and most damaging of all, proof of insurance fraud spanning half a decade. It had taken months of careful work to compile it all. Every time James had mocked my Civic at charity events, every time he'd belittled my little repair shop at social gatherings, every time I'd caught Sarah gazing at him with poorly concealed admiration, I'd channeled that humiliation into meticulous investigation. The door to my office opened, and Mike, my head mechanic and closest friend, walked in. He'd been with me since the beginning, when this shop was nothing but a two-bay garage with second-hand tools and big dreams. "Boss," he said, shaking his head in disbelief as he gestured at the TV. "I knew you were planning something, but this is something else." I smiled, remembering the night 6 months ago when Mike had first brought me the evidence that would start it all. A customer had come to us for a second opinion on a certified pre-owned luxury vehicle from Bennett's dealership. What we found was disturbing: sophisticated odometer tampering, hidden accident damage, and forged certification documents. "Remember that Mercedes last summer?" I asked Mike. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The one with the rolled-back odometer. He nodded, pulling up a chair. Yeah, the one where the actual mileage was double what Bennett's dealership claimed. That poor family nearly went broke on repairs. That was just the beginning, I said, turning my laptop to show him. After that case, I started looking deeper. Every time a customer came in with a Bennett car having issues that shouldn't exist, in a certified vehicle, we documented it. Every time we found tampered odometers or hidden damage, we added it to the file. Mike whistled low as he scrolled through the evidence. But how did you get the internal documents? The proof of insurance fraud. I leaned back in my chair, remembering the late nights and careful planning. Remember Linda, the accountant who used to work for Bennett until he fired her for asking too many questions? The one who brings her Audi to us for service now? I nodded. Turns out she'd been keeping her own records. Suspected something was wrong with the books but couldn't prove it. When I showed her what we'd found with the vehicles, she gave me access to everything she'd documented. My phone buzzed again. Sarah. This time, I glanced at the message. Alex, please. We need to talk. James is saying this is all a misunderstanding. He says you've twisted things to destroy him. That's not true, is it? I set the phone down without responding. Sarah had made her choice months ago, even if she hadn't officially admitted it yet. The long, working dinners with James, the sudden interest in luxury cars, the way she'd started dressing differently. When she knew she'd be seeing him, it had all been obvious, but unlike James, I'd chosen to fight back with facts rather than flash. Listen to this, Mike said, reading from a news update on his phone. State investigators say the fraud scheme could involve thousands of vehicles sold over the past 5 years. Estimated damages could exceed $50 million. I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked my shop's parking lot. Out there, lined up in neat rows, were the cars we were working on, everything from old pickup trucks to luxury sedans. Each one represented trust. Trust from customers who knew we'd treat them fairly, fix what needed fixing, and never try to sell them something they didn't need. You know what the irony is, Mike? I said, watching one of my mechanics carefully guide a client's BMW onto a lift. James spent so much time laughing at my Civic, mocking how I run my business, that he never realized I was building something he couldn't buy with all his fancy cars and designer suits. A reputation for honesty. Mike was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. So what's next? Bennett Luxury Motors is going to need new ownership once the dust settles. The banks will want to offload it fast to recover what they can. I turned back to my desk, pulling out another folder, this one containing bank statements, investment portfolios, and a carefully crafted business plan. Remember that city fleet contract we just landed? The one James was mocking at dinner last night? Mike nodded. What he didn't know is that it was just the first step. I've been saving and investing for years, living well below my means while he burned through cash trying to impress people. That contract proved we can handle large-scale operations. And now, I opened the folder, revealing documents from my meetings with potential investors. Now we're about to show him what real business acumen looks like. My phone buzzed yet again. This time it was from Michael Chen at the State Investigation Office. Alex, you need to see this. We found more than we expected in Bennett's files. How soon can you meet? I grabbed my keys, the same ones that started my embarrassing Civic. Mike, hold down the fort. I've got a meeting that might just change everything. What should I tell Sarah if she shows up? He asked, as I headed for the door. I paused, thinking about the woman who had gradually become a stranger in our own home. Tell her she made her choice when she started believing in James's facade instead of our reality. And tell her that by the time this is over, she'll understand exactly what kind of man she chose to believe in. As I drove to meet Michael Chen, I passed Bennett Luxury Motors. The normally bustling showroom was empty, save for a few investigators documenting evidence. The expensive cars sat silently under harsh fluorescent lights, their price tags now reading more like evidence numbers than status symbols. I smiled, thinking about how James had laughed at my Civic just yesterday. He'd called it a symbol of mediocrity, a sign that I'd never make it in the real business world. What he never understood was that true success isn't about what you drive, it's about what you build. And while he'd been building a house of cards, I'd been laying a foundation that would last. The text from Michael Chen had hinted at even bigger revelations. Whatever they'd found in Bennett's files, it was just the beginning. By the time this was over, I wouldn't just own his dealership, I'd transform it into something he could never have built himself. A business based on integrity. Michael Chen's office at the State Investigation Bureau was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 15 years uncovering automotive fraud. Austere, organized and filled with case files that told stories of corruption beneath the shining veneer of the car industry. I sat across from him, watching as he spread out documents across his desk, each page adding another layer to James Bennett's web of deception. "This goes deeper than we initially thought," Michael said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many similar cases. "The odometer fraud and falsified vehicle histories? That was just the surface." He pulled out a thick folder, its edges worn from frequent handling. "We found connections to international car theft rings, money laundering through offshore accounts, and something even more disturbing." I leaned forward, my coffee forgotten in my hand. "What do you mean?" Michael pulled out several photographs, laying them carefully on the desk. They showed various luxury vehicles in different stages of repair, but something was off about them. These cars, he pointed to a particularly striking red Ferrari, were declared total losses by insurance companies. Bennett's operation was buying them at salvage auctions, doing minimal repairs to make them look perfect on the surface, then selling them as certified pre-owned vehicles at full price. "Jesus," I muttered, picking up one of the photos. "Those cars aren't just fraudulent, they're death traps." "Exactly," Michael nodded grimly. "The structural integrity on most of these vehicles was completely compromised. One bad accident." He didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what he meant. My phone buzzed again. Sarah, her messages had become increasingly desperate throughout the morning. I glanced at the latest one. "Alex, please. James is saying this is all a misunderstanding, that you're trying to destroy him because of us. We need to talk about this. Us." The word hit like a punch to the gut, so she was finally admitting it. "Your wife still doesn't know the whole story, does she?" Michael asked, noting my expression. I set the phone face down on the desk. "She knew enough. She knew James wasn't the successful businessman he claimed to be. She just chose not to see it." Michael shuffled through more papers, pulling out bank statements and transaction records. "Well, she's about to learn just how right you were. Look at this." He handed me a document that made my eyes widen. Bennett wasn't just running a fraudulent dealership. He was using it to launder money for some very dangerous people. The numbers on the page told a story that even Sarah couldn't ignore. Millions of dollars flowing through shell companies, luxury cars being used as currency in international transactions, and at the center of it all, James Bennett, the man who'd mocked my honest living while building an empire on lies. How did no one catch this sooner? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Money talks, and James had spread enough of it around to keep people looking the other way. "Someone did try," Michael said, pulling out another file. "Remember Linda, his former accountant?" I nodded. "She helped me gather some of the initial evidence. What you don't know is that she tried to report this 3 years ago." Michael's expression darkened. "Bennett didn't just fire her. He threatened her, made sure no other dealership in the state would hire her. She's been working part-time bookkeeping jobs ever since." The revelation hit me hard. I'd known James was corrupt, but this level of cruelty, this systematic destruction of anyone who stood in his way, it made my blood boil. There's more, Michael continued, his voice dropping slightly. We found evidence that Bennett was planning to expand. He was in negotiations to buy out 3 other dealerships in the area. If this had gone through, he shook his head. The potential for damage would have been astronomical. I thought about all the families who'd saved for years to buy their dream cars from Bennett, not knowing they were driving rebuilt wrecks. I thought about Linda, whose career he'd destroyed for trying to do the right thing. I thought about Sarah, who'd fallen for his fake charm and hollow promises. What happens now? I asked, though I already had a plan forming. Michael gathered the documents into neat piles. Bennett's looking at serious time. The FBI is involved now because of the international connections. His assets will be frozen, and eventually the dealership will need to be liquidated to pay restitution to his victims. I pulled out my own folder, the one I'd been preparing for months. And if someone were interested in purchasing the dealership during liquidation? Michael raised an eyebrow. You're thinking of buying Bennett Luxury Motors? I'm thinking of transforming it, I corrected. The location is perfect, the facilities are top-notch, and with the right management. I let the suggestion hang in. The heir. You'd need significant capital, Michael warned. Even at liquidation prices, we're talking millions. I smiled, opening my folder to reveal bank statements, investment portfolios, and letters of intent from several silent partners. Remember that city fleet contract? That was just the beginning. I've been planning this for longer than Bennett realizes. Michael studied the documents, his eyes widening slightly. You've been busy. While James was showing off his latest Ferrari, I was building relationships with legitimate investors, people who believe in honest business practices. I pulled out another document, a comprehensive business plan for transforming Bennett Luxury Motors into something new. I'm not interested in just buying his dealership. I want to rebuild its reputation from the ground up. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Sarah, it was Mike from my shop. Boss, you need to see this. Sarah's here with James's lawyer. They're demanding to speak with you. I showed the message to Michael. Looks like reality is finally setting in. He nodded grimly. Be careful. Bennett's the type to lash out when he's cornered. And if your wife is still loyal to him. She made her choice, I said, standing up. Now she gets to live with the consequences. As I gathered my documents, Michael handed me one last file. This contains evidence we haven't made public yet. Things that even Bennett doesn't know we've discovered. Keep it close. You might need it. I took the file, feeling its weight in my hands. Thank you, Michael, for everything. Just promise me one thing, he said, as I reached the door. When you take over that dealership, run it right. This industry has enough sharks. I nodded, thinking about my Civic parked outside, the car James had mocked so publicly. You know what the difference is between James and me? He saw cars as status symbols. I see them as responsibilities. Every vehicle that leaves my shop is someone's trust in me, someone's safety in my hands. That's why you'll succeed where he failed, Michael said simply. As I drove back to my shop, I thought about how different things would look in just a few months. Bennett Luxury Motors would become something new, something honest. The showroom that had once housed James's empire of lies would be transformed into a place where people could buy cars without fear of being cheated. But first, I had to deal with Sarah and James's lawyer. They were about to learn that while James had been teaching me about image, I'd been teaching him about consequences, and this lesson was just beginning. I pulled into my shop's parking lot, my Civic looking particularly humble next to the gleaming Mercedes that James's lawyer had apparently arrived in. Through the shop's front windows, I could see Sarah pacing in the waiting area, her designer outfit and perfectly styled hair a stark contrast to the practical environment of my repair business. Next to her sat a man in an expensive suit, Harrison Wells, one of the most high-priced attorneys in the city. Mike was keeping them contained in the waiting area, his arms crossed as he stood guard near my office door. He caught my eye as I walked in, giving me a subtle nod that told me he had my back, the same way he'd had it for the past decade, through every up and down of building this business. "Alex," Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying that familiar tone of condescension, masked as concern. "Finally, we've been waiting for over an hour." I ignored her, turning to Mike instead. "Any emergency calls while I was out?" "Mrs. Rodriguez's Camry is ready for pickup," he reported, playing along with my deliberate dismissal of our unwanted guests. "And we got that parts shipment for the city fleet maintenance." "Excellent," I said, noting how Harrison Wells shifted impatiently in his expensive leather shoes. "Make sure Mrs. Rodriguez knows about the senior discount we discussed." "Mr. Carter," Wells interrupted, his voice carrying that precise mix of authority and disdain that only years of defending wealthy clients could perfect. "My client, Mr. Bennett, would like to discuss the situation at hand." I turned to him slowly, letting my silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. "Your client is currently in custody for massive fraud, Mr. Wells." "I'm not sure what there is to discuss." "These allegations are grossly overstated," Wells began, pulling out a leather portfolio. "Mr. Bennett is prepared to make certain arrangements that would benefit all parties involved." Sarah stepped closer, her hand reaching for my arm. I moved away before she could touch me. "Alex, please. James is willing to make this right. He'll give you anything you want. A partnership in the dealership, a fleet of new cars, whatever you need to drop this vendetta." I couldn't help but laugh. "A vendetta? Is that what you think this is?" "Mr. Carter," Wells cut in smoothly, "my client recognizes that there may have been some unfortunate comments made regarding your choice of vehicle and business model. He's prepared to make amends." I walked to my office door, opening it. "Come in, both of you. Let's discuss these unfortunate comments and what they're really worth." My office wasn't fancy, just a simple space with a solid desk, comfortable chairs, and walls lined with certifications and thank you letters from satisfied customers. I sat behind my desk, gesturing for them to take the seats across from me. Sarah perched nervously on the edge of her chair, while Wells settled in with the confidence of someone used to controlling rooms like this. "Before you start," I said, pulling out the file Michael Chen had given me, "I'd like to share something with you, particularly you, Sarah, since you seem to think this is about hurt feelings over some mocked car." I spread out photographs across my desk, the salvaged luxury cars that Bennett had rebuilt and sold as certified pre-owned. "Your boyfriend wasn't just selling lies, Sarah. He was selling death traps, cars that could have killed families." Wells started to speak, but I cut him off, laying down bank statements next. "And here's where the money went. Offshore accounts, shell companies, connections to international car theft rings." "Still think this is about my Civic?" Sarah's face had gone pale. "That's not—" "James said those were just paperwork irregularities." "Paperwork irregularities." I pulled out more documents. "Tell that to Linda, the accountant whose career he destroyed for trying to report this. Tell that to the families who spent their life savings on cars that were worth a fraction of what they paid. Tell that to the single mother who almost died when her certified Mercedes's airbags failed because Bennett's shop had done a cosmetic repair instead of a proper structural fix." Wells cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, sharing confidential investigation materials could be considered a public service." I finished for him. "These documents are already with the FBI, Mr. Wells. Your client's empire isn't just crumbling. It's being demolished, brick by brick." "What do you want?" Sarah whispered, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "Money, a public apology." I leaned back in my chair, looking at the woman I had once loved, who had gradually become a stranger in pursuit of status and wealth. What I want is justice for every person your boyfriend defrauded, for every life he put at risk, for every honest business he tried to destroy with his corruption. Mr. Carter, Wells tried again, surely we can come to some arrangement that... You want to know what's happening next? I cut him off, pulling out my own folder. Bennett Luxury Motors will be liquidated. The courts will oversee the sale of assets to pay restitution to victims, and I'm going to buy it. Sarah's head snapped up. What? That's right, I continued, enjoying the shock on their faces. While James was busy showing off his imported cars and mocking my little repair shop, I was building something real, something with actual value. The city fleet contract. That was just the beginning. I have investors, banking relationships, and most importantly, a reputation for honesty that James could never buy with all his stolen money. Wells shifted in, his seat, his confidence visibly wavering. The dealership's assets are frozen. Any sale would require court approval, and I already have preliminary approval, I interrupted, sliding across a document bearing an official court seal. The state investigators are quite interested in seeing Bennett Luxury Motors transformed into a legitimate business, one that won't put lives at risk for profit. Sarah stood up suddenly, her hands shaking. You planned this. All of it. You let James mock you, let him think he was winning while I was gathering evidence, building a case, planning for the future? I stood as well, my voice steady. That's right, Sarah. While you were falling for James's fake success, I was building real success, the kind that lasts. This isn't over, Wells stated, but his voice lacked conviction. Mr. Bennett has resources, connections. Had resources, I corrected. Had connections. Right now, everyone who was ever connected to James Bennett is running for cover, trying to avoid being caught in the investigation's net. Your client isn't just facing state charges anymore, Mr. Wells. The FBI is involved. Interpol is asking big questions, and I'm about to turn his symbol of corruption into something he never could have built, an honest business. I walked to my office door, opening it. We're done here. Tell James his offer is declined. And Mr. Wells, I'd be careful about which clients you choose to defend. This investigation is far from over. As they stood to leave, Sarah paused. Alex, I didn't know about the cars, about the fraud. I swear. I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not the woman I'd married, but someone who had lost her way chasing an illusion of success. You knew enough, Sarah. You knew he wasn't honest, knew he treated people badly, knew what kind of man he really was. You just didn't care as long as he was winning. She flinched at my words, but couldn't deny them. As she walked out, her expensive heels clicking against the floor, I called after her one last time. Oh, and Sarah? You might want to check the ownership documents on that new Mercedes you've been driving. According to the investigation, it's one of the salvage rebuilds James passed off as new. Might not be as safe as you thought. The color drained from her face as she hurried out, Wells following close behind. Through the window, I watched them leave, Sarah's confident strut replaced by the uncertain walk of someone whose world was crumbling. Mike stepped into my office after they'd gone. That was something else, boss. You okay? I sat back down at my desk, looking at the honest business I'd built, thinking about the greater one I was about to create. You know what, Mike? For the first time in a long time, I really am. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael Chen. Court date set for asset liquidation hearing. You ready? I smiled, typing back a simple response. More than ready. Time to show James what real success looks like. The county courthouse was packed the morning of the asset liquidation hearing. Local news crews clustered around the entrance, their cameras trained on the steady stream of people filing inside. James Bennett's fall from grace had become the biggest story in the city's business community, and everyone wanted to see how it would end. I adjusted my tie as I walked up the courthouse steps, noticing how different this felt from my usual workday attire. The suit I wore wasn't flashy or designer-made like James's had been, but it was well-tailored and professional, exactly what you'd expect from someone about to take over a major automotive business. Inside the courtroom, I spotted familiar faces. Linda, Bennett's former accountant, sat near the front, her posture straight, but her hands nervously clutching her purse. Several of Bennett's fraud victims were scattered throughout the room, some of whom had become loyal customers at my repair shop after discovering their certified luxury cars weren't what they seemed. Michael Chen nodded to me from his position. Near the prosecutor's table, a stack of files in front of him. My own legal team, not as expensive as Harrison Wells but far more ethical, was already setting up at our designated table, spreading out the documentation for our bid to acquire. Bennett Luxury Motors. The murmur in the courtroom dropped to silence as James was led in. He wore an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual Italian suits, his carefully maintained image stripped away to reveal the fraud beneath. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something I'd never seen in James Bennett before. Fear. Sarah sat 3 rows. Behind him, still dressed immaculately but noticeably alone, the social circle that had once surrounded her, laughing at James's jokes and mocking my modest lifestyle, was nowhere to be seen. Amazing how quickly people distance themselves when the facade of success crumbles. "All rise," the bailiff called out as Judge Marion Peterson entered. She was known for her no-nonsense approach to white-collar crime, and her presence here sent a clear message about how seriously the court was taking Bennett's case. "Be seated," she commanded, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed the documents. Before her, "We're here today to address the liquidation of assets belonging to Bennett Luxury Motors and associated enterprises following the arrest and indictment of James Bennett on multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and other related charges." I watched as James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This wasn't his usual environment. He was used to controlling rooms with his charm and swagger, not sitting helpless as his empire was dismantled. "Your Honor." Harrison Wells stood still, trying to project confidence despite his client's situation. "Before we proceed with any liquidation discussions, my client would like to propose an alternative arrangement. We have potential investors willing to maintain current operations under new management, with Mr. Bennett removing himself entirely from—" "Mr. Wells," Judge Peterson interrupted, her voice sharp, "your client's assets have been frozen by federal authorities. He has no say in their disposition. This hearing is to evaluate legitimate bids for the business and its assets, with proceeds to be used for victim restitution. Nothing more." Wells sat down, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide his deflation. James's head dropped slightly, another sign that reality was finally sinking in. The prosecutor stood next. "Your Honor, we have reviewed all submitted bids for Bennett Luxury Motors. While there were several interested parties, one proposal stands out in terms of both financial viability and commitment to ethical business practices." My lawyer, David Mitchell, stood as well. "Your Honor, my client, Alex Carter, has submitted a comprehensive proposal for acquiring and restructuring Bennett Luxury Motors. Mr. Carter has over a decade of experience in the automotive industry, a proven track record of ethical business practices, and the financial backing to ensure successful transition of operations." Judge Peterson turned her attention to me. "Mr. Carter, your bid includes some interesting provisions regarding customer restitution and business reformation. Would you care to elaborate?" I stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. "Yes, Your Honor. Beyond meeting the court's asking price for the assets, our proposal includes a comprehensive plan to address the damage Mr. Bennett's fraud has caused. We intend to honor all valid warranties on vehicles sold by Bennett Luxury Motors, provide free safety inspections to past customers, and establish a customer restitution fund beyond what the court requires. "And your financing for this venture?" she asked, though I could tell from her tone that she'd already reviewed everything thoroughly. "Secured and verified, Your Honor. We have letters of commitment from multiple investors, including several respected figures in the automotive industry, who specialize in turning around troubled dealerships. Additionally, our current business's success with the City Fleet contract demonstrates our capability to handle operations of this scale." From the corner of my eye, I could see James's reaction. Each word was like a physical blow, dismantling the image he'd created of me as a small-time mechanic who would never amount to anything in the real business world. "The court has reviewed Mr. Carter's proposal extensively," Judge Peterson announced, "including the recommendations from the state investigation team and the federal authorities. Mr. Carter's reputation for ethical business practices, combined with his practical experience and solid financial backing, makes his bid particularly attractive, given the circumstances." She paused, reviewing one last document before continuing. "Furthermore, Mr. Carter's history of identifying and reporting fraudulent practices in the industry demonstrates a commitment to consumer protection that this court finds especially relevant given the nature of Mr. Bennett's crimes." James, suddenly, stood up, his handcuffs rattling. "This is ridiculous. He's just a mechanic. He doesn't know the first thing about running a luxury car dealership. He drives a Civic, for God's sake." "Remove Mr. Bennett if he cannot control himself," Judge Peterson ordered sharply. The bailiff moved forward, but James wasn't finished. He's doing this for revenge," James shouted as the bailiff grabbed his arm. "Because I took his wife. Because I showed everyone what a failure he really is." The room fell silent, all eyes moving between James, Sarah, and me. I remained standing, calm and composed, letting James's outburst speak for itself. "Mr. Bennett," Judge Peterson's voice cut through the tension like a knife, "the only failure in this room is the man who built his success on lies and fraud. Mr. Carter has demonstrated exactly what real success looks like: honest work, ethical practices, and genuine concern for customers' well-being." She turned back to the documents before her. "This court approves the sale of Bennett Luxury Motors and all associated assets to Alex Carter and his investment group under the terms specified in the submitted proposal. Mr. Carter, I trust you will follow through on your commitments to reform this business and make restitution to its victims." "Yes, Your Honor," I responded simply. As James was led from the courtroom, still protesting, I caught Sarah's eye one last time. She looked lost, realizing perhaps for the first time that she had tied herself to an illusion, betraying something real for something that was never going to last. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around me, shoving microphones in my face and asking for comments. I gave them what they wanted. Not a story of revenge, but one of transformation. Bennett Luxury Motors will become Carter Automotive Group, I announced. We'll maintain the high-end inventory people expect, but with one crucial difference. Every car we sell will be exactly what we claim it is. No more fraud, no more lies, no more putting profits above people's safety. As the cameras flashed and questions flew, I saw my trusted Civic parked at the curb, just where I'd left it. The car James had mocked, the symbol he'd used to judge my worth, had outlasted all his exotic vehicles. Kind of like me. Mike was waiting by my car, grinning. "Ready to go see your new dealership, boss?" I smiled, pulling out my keys. "Let's go show everyone what real success looks like." The morning I walked into Bennett Luxury Motors, now Carter Automotive Group, as its owner was surreal. The massive showroom that had once showcased James's ego was eerily quiet. the pristine floors reflecting the early sunlight streaming through. Floor-to-ceiling windows, each gleaming vehicle on display told a story, not just of luxury and status, but of the corruption that had finally been exposed. Mike whistled low as we walked through the space. "This is something else, boss. Hard to believe this is all yours now." "Ours," I corrected him. "I meant what I said about making you partner in the expansion." I pulled out a set of keys, not just any keys, but the master keys to the entire facility. This place isn't just going to be about selling cars anymore. It's going to be about doing things right. The click of heels on the polished floor made us turn. Linda, Bennett's former accountant, walked toward us, carrying a stack of files. I'd hired her as our new CFO, her first act of redemption against the man who'd tried to destroy her career. "The preliminary audit is complete," she announced, her confidence returning with each passing day. It's worse than we thought. The fraud wasn't just in the car sales and certifications. He had parallel books running for everything: service records, parts inventory, employee payroll. I nodded, unsurprised. "Show me everything. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with." We gathered in what had been James's ornate office. I'd already ordered the removal of his pretentious furniture, the hand-carved desk, the leather chairs that probably cost more than some cars. In their place was a simple, functional workspace. The walls, once covered in photos of James with celebrities and luxury cars, were now bare, waiting for a new story to be told. Linda spread the documents across the conference table. "Here's what we found. Bennett was running a sophisticated scheme. He wasn't just selling salvage cars as certified pre-owned. He was using the dealership to launder money from multiple illegal operations." She pointed to various financial statements. These service records, complete fabrications. He was billing insurance companies for repairs that were never done, using the parts inventory as a cover for cash movements. The certified pre-owned program was just the tip of the iceberg. Mike leaned in, studying the numbers. How did he get away with this for so long? "Money," Linda replied simply. "He paid off inspectors, bribed officials, and maintained a network of corrupt partners who helped him keep the scheme going. But that's not even the worst part." She pulled out another file. "Remember those car theft rings the investigators mentioned? Bennett wasn't just laundering their money. He was actively participating. Some of the luxury cars he sold were stolen from other countries, given new VINs, and sold here as legitimate imports." The scope of James's corruption was staggering, but it also presented an opportunity. "This is why we're going to do more than just change the name," I said, standing to look out over the showroom floor. "We're going to transform everything about how this place operates." My phone buzzed, a text from Michael Chen. "FBI just finished their sweep of Bennett's offshore accounts. You won't believe what they found. Can you meet?" "Linda," I turned back to the room, "I need you to start implementing our new compliance protocols immediately. Every car on this lot needs to be re-verified, every service record authenticated, every employee thoroughly vetted." She nodded, already making notes. "What about the existing staff?" "Complete reviews of everyone," I decided. "Those who were knowingly involved in Bennett's schemes are out. Those who were just following orders without understanding the full scope, we'll evaluate case by case. Some good people got caught up in his web. They deserve a chance to work for an honest business." Mike raised an eyebrow. "You really think some of them didn't know?" "I think fear and money make people see what they want to see," I replied, thinking of Sarah and how easily she'd been blinded by James's facade of success. "But that ends now. From this point forward, Carter Automotive Group operates with complete transparency." A commotion at the front of the showroom caught our attention. Through the glass walls of the office, I could see Sarah walking in, her confidence visibly shaken, but still trying to maintain her usual poise. "I'll handle this," I told Mike and Linda. "Start on those audits." I met Sarah by a display of luxury SUVs, vehicles that, under Bennett's ownership, might have been dangerous salvage rebuilds passed off as pristine, certified pre-owned cars. Now, each one would have to earn its certification honestly. "Nice office," she said, attempting her usual sophisticated tone, but falling short. "I suppose you're enjoying all this." "This isn't about enjoyment, Sarah. It's about fixing what James broke, including people's trust in this industry." She flinched slightly at James's name. "The police came to my apartment this morning. They had questions about the cars James gave me, about financial transactions, about everything. They think I was involved." "Were you?" I asked simply. She hesitated, looking around at the dealership that had once represented everything she wanted. "I didn't know about the fraud, about the stolen cars, or the danger he was putting people in. I just wanted the lifestyle," I finished for her, "the status, the feeling of being associated with success, even if it was fake." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no satisfaction in her pain. "What am I supposed to do now?" "Everything I have. The car, the apartment, the clothes. It's all connected to James's money. Money that turns out to be stolen." I looked at her for a moment, seeing not the confident woman who had betrayed me for a fraudster, but someone who had lost herself in pursuit of an illusion. "You'll do what honest people do, Sarah. You'll start over, build something real this time." "Like you did?" she asked, a hint of her old bitterness creeping in. "Yes," I replied simply. "Like I did, with hard work, integrity, and patience. It's not as flashy as James's way, but it lasts." My phone buzzed again, another message from Michael Chen. "Just found documentation of additional shell companies. This goes deeper than anyone realized." "I have to go," I told Sarah. "The investigators need to meet with me. You should cooperate. Fully with them, Sarah. Tell them everything you know, even the things that embarrass you. It's your best chance at moving forward." She nodded slowly, then looked around the showroom one last time. "You know, I never really understood why you kept driving that Civic, even after we could afford something better. I thought it was about being stubborn, or maybe just spite against James's success." "It was about priorities," I corrected her. "About understanding that real success isn't about what you drive. It's about how you drive it, about integrity, about building something that matters." As she turned to leave, she paused. Will you keep the dealership's name?" "Bennett. Luxury Motors?" I shook my head. "No, that name stands for fraud and corruption now. We're going to build something new, something honest. Carter Automotive Group will be everything Bennett Luxury Motors wasn't: transparent, ethical, and genuinely focused on customer safety and satisfaction." After she left, I walked back through the showroom, looking at each vehicle with new eyes. Every car here would need to be thoroughly inspected, its history verified, its safety assured. It would take time, money, and endless effort to transform this place from a monument to fraud into a beacon of integrity. But that's what real success looks like. Not a quick grab for status and wealth, but a patient, determined build toward something that matters. James had mocked my Civic, had laughed at my small-time repair shop, had tried to paint me as a failure. Now his empire was mine, not because I'd schemed and cheated like he had, but because I'd stayed true to my principles, built genuine relationships, and worked with integrity. The very things he'd mocked had become the foundation of my success. My phone buzzed one final time. Michael Chen again. "Just interviewed Bennett in custody. He finally realizes what happened, says he never saw it coming. Never thought the guy with the Civic could take everything from him." I smiled, thinking of my trusted Honda still parked outside, a symbol not of failure, but of the kind of success that actually matters. It was time to show the world what real automotive excellence looks like, one honest deal at a time. 3 months after taking over Bennett Luxury Motors, I stood in the newly renovated showroom of Carter Automotive Group, watching as workers installed our new signage. The space had been transformed. Gone were the gaudy displays and pretentious artwork that James had used to create an illusion of success. In their place was something more valuable: transparency. Each vehicle now had a detailed history report prominently displayed beside it, along with comprehensive inspection results and certification documentation. The service center, once a hub of fraudulent repairs and insurance scams, had been completely overhauled with state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment and certified technicians who took pride in their work. Mike approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Latest numbers are in," he said, handing me one of the cups. "Despite everything, or maybe because of it, we're actually doing better than Bennett ever did. Turns out people appreciate honest business practices." I nodded, taking a sip. "How's the customer restitution program going?" "Linda's team has processed about 60% of the claims so far. You wouldn't believe some of the stories we're hearing. People who spent their life savings on cars that turned out to be death traps. Families who got stuck with fraudulent loans. Bennett hurt a lot of people. And we're making it right," I reminded him. "Every single person who got cheated gets their justice." My phone buzzed. A message from Michael Chen. "Bennett's asking to see you. Says he has something important to tell you. Your call." I showed Mike the message. He frowned. "You sure you want to face him? Guy's still dangerous, even behind bars." "I need to," I replied. "There's something I want him to see." The drive to the detention center where James was being held pending his federal trial felt surreal. I deliberately took my Civic, the same car he had mocked so viciously at that dinner months ago. Some things come full circle. The security check was thorough, but eventually I was led to a visiting room. James sat on the other side of a thick glass partition, his designer suits replaced by prison orange, his carefully maintained appearance showing signs of wear. But his eyes, they still held that calculating look, even if the smugness had been replaced by something darker. He picked up the phone on his side of the partition. I did the same on mine. "You actually came," he said, his voice lacking its usual smooth confidence. "Didn't think you would. I brought something for you to see," I replied, pulling out my phone and showing him photos of the transformed dealership. "Carter Automotive Group. We're doing record sales, actually. Turns out people prefer buying cars from someone they can trust." His jaw tightened. "Is that why you came? To gloat?" "No, James. I came to show you what real success looks like, not the kind built on fraud and fear, but the kind that comes from doing things right." He leaned forward slightly. "You think you're better than me? You're still just a mechanic who got lucky. You caught me off guard, that's all." "That's where you're wrong," I corrected him. "I'm not just a mechanic. I'm a businessman who understands that true success isn't about flash and status. It's about building something that lasts." I showed him more photos. The new service center, the transparent certification process, the customer restitution program in action. "Everything you built was a lie, James. Every car you sold, every deal you made, every person you tried to impress, it was all fake." "And Sarah?" he asked, a hint of his old smirk returning. "Was she fake too?" "Sarah was looking for the same thing you were selling, an illusion. The difference is she's finally seeing it for what it was. She's cooperating with the investigators. By the way, telling them everything she knows." The smirk vanished. "She wouldn't. She already has. Turns out your charm isn't quite as effective when people see who you really are." He slammed his hand against the partition, drawing sharp looks from the guards. "You think you've won? You think taking my dealership and turning it into your little honest business paradise makes you better than me? I built an empire." "You built a house of cards," I corrected him calmly. And now you're sitting in jail while I run the legitimate business you could never build. How's that for irony? I pulled out one final photo, my Civic parked in front of the dealership, right next to a row of luxury vehicles. Remember when you mocked my car, James? Said it showed I'd never make it in the real business world. Well, here's the thing about my Civic. It's paid for, it's reliable, and most importantly, it's honest. Just like everything else I've built. Is that why you really came? He sneered. To lecture me about honesty? No, I replied, standing up. I came to thank you. Your mockery, your arrogance, your belief that flash matters more than substance. It all helped me build something better. Every time you laughed at my car or my business, you motivated me to prove that real success doesn't need fancy wrapping. I gathered my things, but before I turned to leave, I had one last thing to say. Oh, and James, remember that Ferrari you were so proud of, the one you always parked out front? We found its real VIN number. Turns out it was stolen from a collector in Europe. The FBI's returning it to its rightful owner next week. Thought you'd want to know. The color drained from his face. You can't. Already done, I cut him off. That's the difference between us, James. You spent your life taking things that didn't belong to you. I built something of my own. As I walked out of the detention center, my phone buzzed with a message from Linda. Just finished another round of customer restitution payments. You should see the thank you letters we're getting. People can't believe a car dealership is actually making things right. I smiled, getting into my Civic. The same car that James had mocked was now a symbol of everything he'd lost. Integrity, reliability, genuine success. I drove back to the dealership, thinking about how far we'd come. The showroom was busy when I returned, filled with customers who had heard about our commitment to transparency and honest dealing. Mike was showing a family our new certification process, explaining how every vehicle's history was verified and documented. Linda was in her office, managing the financial side with the precision and integrity that James had once punished her for attempting. "Mr. Carter," a voice called out as I walked through the showroom. I turned to see one of James's former customers, a man who had nearly lost everything to one of Bennett's fraudulent deals. "I wanted to thank you. Your restitution program, it saved my family from bankruptcy. We never thought we'd see that money again." I shook his hand. "We're just making things right. It's what honest businesses do." "Well, my son just got his license," he continued, "and after seeing how you've changed this place, how you're running things now, we'd like to buy his first car from you. Something reliable, safe, and honestly represented." I smiled, thinking of my own Civic. "I think we can help with that. Let me show you our certified pre-owned program, the real one, where every car's history is an open book." As I walked with him through the showroom, I caught my reflection in the showroom windows. I saw not just a businessman, but someone who had proven that success doesn't come from what you drive or how much money you flash. It comes from building something real, something that helps people, something that lasts. James had tried to build an empire on lies. I had built something better, a legacy of truth. And in the end, that was the sweetest revenge of all. 1 year to the day after James Bennett had mocked my Civic at that fateful dinner, I stood at the podium during the grand reopening celebration of Carter Automotive Group. The showroom was packed with customers, employees, and even local media, all there to witness what honest success looked like. The dealership had been completely transformed. Where Bennett had once displayed stolen exotic cars and fraudulent certifications, we now showcased vehicles with complete transparency. Each car's history was digitally accessible through QR codes displayed prominently on the windows. Our service center had become the most trusted in the state, and our certified pre-owned program was setting new industry standards for honesty and reliability. A year ago, I began my speech looking out over the crowd. Someone told me that in this business you are what you drive. He meant it as an insult, pointing to my Honda Civic as proof that I'd never succeed in the luxury car world. A knowing chuckle rippled through the audience. The story of Bennett's downfall and my rise had become something of a local legend. But he was right about one thing: you are what you drive. My Civic represents everything I believe in: reliability, honesty, value for money, and the understanding that true success isn't about showing off, it's about doing things right. I gestured to the showroom around us. Carter Automotive Group isn't just a car dealership. It's a promise to every customer that what you see is what you get. No hidden histories, no rolled-back odometers, no dangerous rebuilt wrecks past. Offers certified pre-owned vehicles. Just honest cars sold by honest people. Mike stood near the front, grinning proudly. As my new partner in the business, he'd been instrumental in implementing our revolutionary service protocols. Linda, now our CFO, stood beside him, her head held high, a far cry from the broken woman Bennett had tried to destroy for attempting to expose his fraud. In the past year, I continued, we've accomplished something remarkable. We've not only made restitution to every customer who was defrauded by the previous ownership, but we've also established a new standard for automotive retail integrity. The screens behind me displayed our achievements: customer satisfaction ratings that led the industry, safety certification processes that exceeded federal standards, and financial results that proved honest business could be profitable business. But perhaps our proudest achievement, I said, pressing a button that changed the display, is this. The screen showed a series of testimonials from families who had been victims of Bennett's fraud, now proud customers of Carter Automotive Group. We didn't just take over a corrupt business, we transformed it into something that helps people. As I concluded my speech, I noticed a familiar face at the back of the crowd. Sarah stood there, looking different from the woman who had once chosen James's flash over my substance. She wore simpler clothes now, and her expression carried the weight of someone who had learned difficult lessons. After the ceremony, as people mingled and explored the showroom, she approached me. "Quite a change from last year," she said softly, looking around at what the dealership had become. "Everything's different now," I agreed. "How are you doing?" She gave a small, sad smile. "Starting over. Got a job as an entry-level real estate agent at a small firm. It's not the luxury market I used to work in, but it's honest work. That's what matters," I nodded. "Building something real. James's sentencing is next week," she said, her voice catching slightly. "They're saying with all the federal charges he could get 20 years. "Actions have consequences," I replied, not unkindly. "He built his success on other people's misery. That catches up with you eventually." She looked at my Civic, still parked proudly in front of the dealership. "You know, I used to be embarrassed when you'd pick me up in that car. I thought it reflected poorly on us, on me. I never understood what it really represented. And what's that?" "Integrity," she said simply. "The kind of success that doesn't need to show off because it's real." She paused, then added, "I'm sorry. I couldn't see that sooner." Before I could respond, Mike approached with an elderly couple, more of Bennett's former victims. "Boss, the Hendersons want to thank you personally for the restitution program. Their grandson is about to start college, and that money made all the difference." I excused myself from Sarah, turning my attention to the Hendersons. Mrs. Henderson had tears in her eyes as she held my hands. "You didn't just give us back our money," she said. "You gave us back our faith in people." That, I realized, was the real victory. Not taking Bennett's dealership, not proving him wrong about success, but restoring people's trust in an industry he had tainted with his greed. Later that evening, after the crowds had gone and the showroom was quiet, I sat in my office, the same one where James had once plotted his schemes. The space was different now, decorated not with symbols of status, but with thank you letters from satisfied customers and photos of families with their newly purchased cars. My phone buzzed with a message from Michael Chen. Thought you'd want to know. FBI just closed the last of Bennett's international cases. They're returning the final batch of stolen vehicles to their rightful owners next month. You've helped make a lot of things right. I smiled, thinking about how far we'd come. The dealership that had once been a monument to fraud was now a beacon of integrity. The man who had mocked my Civic was facing decades in prison. The woman who had chosen flash over substance was learning the value of honest work. But most importantly, I had proven that real success doesn't need to be wrapped in expensive packages or announced with loud boasts. It builds quietly, steadily, on a foundation of integrity and hard work. Mike knocked on my door, holding up a set of keys. Ready to head out, boss? Linda's treating us to dinner to celebrate the reopening. I stood, grabbing my own keys, the same ones that started my trusted Civic. You know what the best part is, Mike? We did this our way. No shortcuts, no fraud, no compromising our principles. Speaking of which, he grinned, you sure you don't want to drive one of these luxury cars home? You own them all now, after all. I laughed, thinking about James's sneer when he'd mocked my choice of vehicle. Nah, I'll stick with my Civic. It's gotten me this far, hasn't it? As we walked through the showroom, I looked at each perfectly detailed car, each honest certification, each transparent history report. This wasn't just a business anymore. It was proof that integrity beats flash, that substance trumps style, and that the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something better than they ever could. I climbed into my Civic, the same car that had carried me through every step of this journey. As I turned the key, I thought about James, sitting in his cell, waiting for a sentence that would keep him there for decades. I thought about Sarah, learning to build an honest life without shortcuts. I thought about all the people who had laughed at my modest success. None of them was laughing now, because in the end, I hadn't just bought a dealership. I'd proven that true success isn't about what you drive. It's about how you drive it. 5 years after taking over Bennett Luxury Motors, I sat in my office at Carter Automotive Group's newest location, our 5th dealership in the state. The empire I'd built wasn't just bigger than James Bennett's had ever been. It was something he could never have created, a legitimate business empire built on trust and integrity. The morning news played quietly on my office TV, showing coverage of James's latest failed appeal. He'd been sentenced to 25 years for his crimes, and each attempt to reduce his sentence only revealed more of his past frauds. The man who had once mocked my Civic was now watching his remaining years disappear behind bars. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Just finished the quarterly audit, all 5 locations showing record profits. Turns out honesty really is the best policy. I smiled, remembering how Bennett had fired her for trying to expose his fraud. Now she was the CFO of a dealership group that was revolutionizing the industry. Mike walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a thick folder. You're going to want to see this, he said, setting both down on my desk. Remember that industry award for ethical business practices we were nominated for? The one that usually goes to those big national chains. I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. We won, he grinned, opening the folder to show me the official notification. All 5 Carter Automotive Group locations ranked in the top percentile for customer satisfaction, transparency, and ethical business practices. They want you to give the keynote speech at the national convention. The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 years ago, James Bennett had sneered at my business ethics, calling them a sign of weakness in the real automotive world. Now those same principles had built something his fraud never could, lasting success. A knock on my office door drew our attention. Michael Chen, now the head of the state's automotive crime division, stood there with a smile. Hope I'm not interrupting. Never. I gestured for him to come in. "What brings you by?" "Two things, actually," he said, taking a seat. "First, we're using Carter Automotive Group as a case study for our new dealer certification program. Your transparent documentation system, customer protection policies, and ethical business practices are becoming the industry standard." I nodded, thinking about how far we'd come from the days when Bennett's fraud had dominated the local market. "And the second thing?" Michael's smile widened. "Remember those international contacts Bennett used for his stolen car operation? Turns out they're all facing charges now. The evidence we gathered from his dealership helped crack open one of the largest automotive fraud rings in history." "Speaking of Bennett," Mike interjected, "heard anything from Sarah lately?" I shook my head. After James's sentencing, she'd moved to another state looking for a fresh start. Last I'd heard, she was working for a small real estate firm, building an honest career far from the luxury market she'd once prized so much. "Actually," Michael said, "that's part of why I'm here. She sent this to my office, asked me to pass it along." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten on simple stationery, nothing like the expensive paper she'd once insisted on using. "Alex, I saw the news about Carter Automotive Group's expansion. 5 dealerships now, all built on honest business practices. I remember when James laughed at your ideas about integrity in the car business. He was wrong about so many things. I'm doing better now. Building something real like you always talked about. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. I finally understand what you meant about true success. The reason I'm writing is to thank you, not for exposing James, though that probably saved a lot of people from getting hurt, but for showing me what real success looks like. I needed that lesson. Take care, Sarah." I folded the letter and tucked it away, feeling no bitterness now, just appreciation for how far we'd all come from that night when James had mocked my Civic at dinner. "You know what the best part is?" Mike said, gesturing toward the window that overlooked our main showroom. "Every car out there tells the truth. Every customer walks in knowing they'll get honest answers. We're not just selling cars. We're changing how the whole industry operates." He was right. Our transparent certification process had become so respected that other dealerships were starting to adopt it. Our customer protection policies were being studied by industry groups. The very things James had mocked, integrity, honesty, putting customers first, had become our greatest strengths. My phone buzzed again, a reminder about tomorrow's appointment. We were meeting with a group of investors interested in helping us expand nationwide. They'd specifically cited our ethical business practices as the reason they wanted to partner with us. "Almost forgot," Michael said, standing to leave. "They're auctioning off the last of Bennett's personal car collection next month. Proceeds going to the Victim Restitution Fund. Thought you might want to know." I smiled, thinking about James's precious Ferrari collection now being sold to help the very people he'd defrauded. "Any chance that red Ferrari he was so proud of is in the auction?" Michael laughed. "The stolen one?" "No, that was returned to its rightful owner in Europe. But here's the kicker. The owner was so impressed with how we handled the situation, he's interested in making Carter Automotive Group his official U.S. distributor." After Michael left, I walked out to the showroom floor. The space was busy, with customers, each one drawn by our reputation for honesty. Every car displayed its complete history proudly. Every salesperson operated with transparency. Every service ticket detailed exactly what was done and why. In the premium section, where James had once showcased his fraudulent luxury vehicles, we now displayed legitimately certified high-end cars. But there was something else too. A special display featuring a Honda Civic, carefully maintained and proudly positioned. "People always ask about that car," Mike said, joining me. "They can't believe it's the same Civic from the Bennett story." I nodded. The car had become something of a legend in the local automotive community. the humble Honda that had outlasted an empire of fraud. We'd been offered significant sums to sell it, but it wasn't for sale. It stood as a reminder that true success isn't about flash or status. You know what I was thinking, Mike said, as we watched a family being helped by one of our sales team members. Bennett thought he was teaching you a lesson that night when he mocked your car. Turns out you taught him one instead. We all learned something, I replied. I learned that honest success is the best revenge. Sarah learned that real achievement doesn't need flash. And James... I paused, thinking about the man who had once seemed so powerful, now serving his sentence in federal prison. James learned that true success isn't about what you drive, it's about how you drive it. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the showroom windows, I took one last look around before heading home. The dealership that had once been a monument to fraud was now a testament to integrity. The business that James had built on lies had been transformed into something honest and enduring. And my Civic, the car he had mocked so viciously, it was still running perfectly, still carrying me forward, still proving that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is staying true to your principles. That's what real success looks like. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.